Caleb jolted awake, his head pounding as if a hammer were slamming against his skull with each heartbeat. Disoriented, he blinked several times to focus his vision, but the harsh, unfamiliar lights overhead made it nearly impossible. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was working late at the lab on his latest project, a revolutionary energy prototype. Yet the surroundings now felt anything but familiar. The cold, sterile smell of the air hit his senses, and his body seemed heavier than usual. He groggily sat up and surveyed the area. It was lavish but alien. The walls shimmered with strange, metallic hues. The bed was a luxurious spread he had never seen before, but it all felt suffocating. Then he noticed it, a collar around his neck. Panic set in. His hands flew up, fingers tracing the metallic band locked tightly around his throat. It hummed softly with an unidentifiable energy, a constant reminder of his helplessness. "Where am I?" Caleb muttered aloud, his voice breaking. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" A deep, almost musical laugh echoed in the chamber, sending a chill down his spine. He turned toward the sound, and there she stood, a towering figure of alien majesty. The woman before him was unlike anything he had seen. Her skin was a shimmering violet, radiating an inner glow. Her eyes, an intense shade of silver, bore into him with a look that was part amusement, part hunger. She was regal, terrifying, and undeniably powerful. "Ah, you're awake," the woman purred, her voice dripping with control. She took slow, deliberate steps toward him. "I was beginning to wonder if you Earthlings needed special care." Caleb's breath hitched in his throat. Who are you?" "I am Queen Terethia," she said, her voice echoing with a sense of command. "Ruler of the Velian Empire, and you are now in my custody, my most prized possession." Caleb's mind reeled. This had to be a nightmare, some kind of illusion. "You've made a mistake. I'm not." Terethia raised a hand, cutting him off. "Oh, there is no mistake, human. We've been watching you for quite some time. Your achievements, your knowledge, it's all very useful. But I'm just an engineer," Caleb shouted, heart pounding with both fear and frustration. "Whatever you want, I can't help you." Terethia smiled, her teeth sharp and glistening. "You underestimate yourself, Caleb Jang. Your work with quantum propulsion, your insights into energy transfer, those are the reasons you're here. You are not just an engineer. You are a key to advancing my empire's reach." She tugged lightly on a chain connected to his collar, forcing Caleb to stumble forward. The cold metal bit into his neck, and he felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He was no longer in control. He was a captive. What do you want from me?" Caleb managed to ask, his voice trembling. Terethia leaned down, her face inches from his, her alien features mesmerizing and terrifying at once. "I want everything from you. Your mind, your body, your spirit. Until I no longer have use for you. You will help me conquer the stars, human, or you will be discarded like the others before you." A deep dread settled in Caleb's gut as he realized the gravity of his situation. He wasn't just some prisoner or test subject. He was now the property of an alien queen who saw him as a mere tool for her own power. Escape seemed impossible, but his mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to regain control over his fate. The Queen's demands. Caleb's first days aboard the alien vessel passed in a haze of confusion and fear. Each morning began with the same routine. Queen Terethia summoning him for discussions, though they were anything but voluntary. She wanted his knowledge, his expertise in quantum propulsion, and in return, she granted him temporary leniency from her crueler methods of control. Yet, the threat loomed constantly. Fail her, and the consequences would be dire. The vessel itself was a marvel of alien technology. Caleb's engineering mind couldn't help but admire the intricacies of the ship's design. Every wall, every panel seemed to be crafted from materials unknown to Earth. Energy flowed through the ship like a living organism, powering systems beyond his understanding. He often found himself studying the corridors, hoping to find some weakness he could exploit for escape. But escape was not Terethia's only deterrent. The Queen's subjects were equally terrifying. Her elite guards, hulking creatures with armored exoskeletons, kept watch over him day and night. There were also the other prisoners, alien beings from across the galaxy, each one more bizarre than the last. Some had resigned themselves to their fate, broken by years of servitude. Others eyed Caleb with suspicion, perhaps wondering if he would be the Queen's new favorite or another casualty in her endless quest for domination. In one of their sessions, Terethia explained her empire's plans. They were expanding, conquering new star systems, enslaving weaker species to bolster their forces. Caleb's work on quantum propulsion, still in its infancy on Earth, was already being adapted into their ships, allowing faster and more efficient travel across the stars. His theories, now turned into alien technology, were propelling a monstrous empire forward. "I can't do this," Caleb finally protested one day, unable to stomach the thought of being part of such destruction. Terethia raised an eyebrow, her smile never faltering. "Oh, but you will, Caleb. You will either work with me or be destroyed." Her threat lingered in the air, but Caleb's resolve had strengthened. He might be outmatched in strength, but not in wit. He would comply for now, but he had no intention of being her pawn forever. A plan began to form in his mind, though he kept it hidden behind a facade of submission. Caleb knew one thing for sure. He would escape this alien nightmare, or he would die trying. The spark of rebellion. Caleb spent his days under constant watch, his every movement monitored by Terethia's guards. He learned quickly that resistance would only bring him pain, but compliance, however feigned, offered him opportunities. If he played along, acted as the cooperative engineer, perhaps he could find a way out of this living nightmare. He would work on their propulsion systems, offer advice, even pretend to admire their technology. But all the while, he kept his true intentions buried deep. He wasn't alone in his thoughts. There were whispers in the shadows, murmurs of discontent among the other prisoners. Many had been here far longer than Caleb, some for years, forced into slavery aboard the Queen's expanding fleet. Most had long given up hope, but a few still carried the flicker of rebellion in their hearts, though they hid it well. One day, after a particularly grueling session with Terethia, Caleb was escorted back to his quarters. The cell-like room he had come to know as his new home was cold and unwelcoming, the walls pulsating softly with a dim blue light. He sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, when the door slid open. Standing in the doorway was someone new. A tall figure, draped in a dark, metallic cloak, their face obscured by a hood. The guards outside the door gave no indication that this visit was unusual, but Caleb could sense something different about this individual. "Caleb Jang," the figure said, their voice low and smooth. "We need to talk." Caleb tensed, ready to defend himself if necessary. "Who are you?" The figure stepped inside, allowing the door to slide shut behind them. As the hood was pulled back, Caleb saw an alien woman with striking features. Her skin was a deep emerald green, and her eyes glowed faintly, much like the walls of the ship. She wasn't Felian. Her species was something else entirely. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice steady but hushed. "I represent a group aboard this vessel who have not yet given up. We've been watching you, and we believe you may be the key to our escape." Caleb's heart raced. Could this be the break he had been waiting for? "I don't understand," he said cautiously. "How could I possibly help you? I'm as trapped as everyone else." Lyra's expression softened slightly. "The Queen chose you for your mind, your knowledge of propulsion. What she doesn't realize is that her greed for control blinds her to the cracks in her own empire. We've been waiting for someone with your skills, someone who can see the weaknesses in your systems, someone who might be able to exploit them." Caleb's skepticism kicked in. "And why should I trust you? For all I know, you're just another one of Terethia's spies." Lyra sighed, as if she'd anticipated his reluctance. I don't ask for blind trust, Caleb. But think about it. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life as her pet? As a cog in her war machine? You've seen what she's capable of. There's no freedom here, no escape, unless we make it ourselves. He had no argument against that. Every fiber of his being longed for freedom, for a way out of this nightmare. If Lyra and her group had even a remote chance of breaking free, it was better than the hopelessness he had felt in isolation. What do you need from me? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with purpose. We need you to sabotage her fleet. Her ships run on the propulsion systems you've helped refine. If you can alter the core energy matrix, disrupt the quantum flow, it could disable the entire fleet. You wouldn't even need to destroy anything, just cause enough chaos for us to escape. It was a risky plan, but Caleb couldn't deny the spark of hope it lit in him. This was his chance, but it also carried incredible danger. Terethia was not the kind to forgive betrayal lightly, and if she discovered what he was doing, there would be no second chances. I'll need access, Caleb said after a long pause. Unrestricted access to the main control systems. Right now, they only let me see what they want me to see. Lyra nodded, as though she had expected this. We can arrange that. It will take time, but the Queen's arrogance works in our favor. She believes she has complete control over you. We'll use that to our advantage. As Lyra turned to leave, Caleb stopped her. And if this doesn't work? She glanced back at him, her face hardening. Then we die. But at least we die fighting. The door slid shut behind her, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts once more. The plan was dangerous, but it was the first real hope he'd had since arriving aboard this alien vessel. He lay back on the bed, staring up at the pulsating lights on the ceiling, mind racing with possibilities. He had to play this perfectly. One misstep, and it could all come crashing down. For the first time in days, Caleb felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just an engineer anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that might just be their only hope for freedom. The Queen's test. Caleb's newfound resolve was put to the test almost immediately. Terethia summoned him the next morning for what she called a special project. He was led to a new chamber within the ship, a vast, circular room filled with towering alien technology. In the center of the room was a machine he had never seen before. It pulsed with energy, its design intricate and far more advanced than anything he had worked on back on Earth. Terethia stood near the machine, her silver eyes gleaming with excitement. This, she said, gesturing grandly toward the device, is the future of my empire. And you, Caleb, will ensure it functions perfectly. Caleb's heart sank. Whatever this machine was, it was powerful. He could feel the energy radiating from it. His mind immediately began analyzing its structure, searching for weaknesses, even as he nodded in feigned compliance. If this was the device that powered her fleet, then it was also the key to their plan. Sabotaging this would cripple the Queen's forces. But Terethia wasn't a fool. She watched him closely, her eyes sharp and discerning. I've noticed you've been quiet lately, she said, her tone conversational, but laced with suspicion. You aren't planning anything, are you, my little engineer? Caleb forced a smile. No, my queen. I'm just focused on the work. Terethia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Good, because if I even suspect that you're betraying me. She let the threat hang in the air. But Caleb didn't need her to finish the sentence. He knew exactly what she was capable of. As he began his work on the machine, his thoughts raced. The plan was in motion, but now it was a race against time. Could he deceive the Queen long enough to make his move? Or would she discover his betrayal before he even had the chance? One thing was certain. There was no turning back now. The Queen's test. Caleb felt the weight of the Queen's threat pressing down on him as he inspected the machine. The alien technology in front of him was unlike anything he had ever seen before, and yet it thrummed with a familiar energy, quantum-based propulsion, only much more refined than his theories. Terathea had brought him to this room to solve a problem, but Caleb saw something else. He saw opportunity. He carefully examined the machine's structure, taking mental notes on its intricacies. The Queen watched him from a distance, her silver eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and control. Caleb knew that every move he made was being scrutinized. He would have to play his part perfectly if he wanted to survive. The machine itself was vast, towering over him like a cathedral of circuits and power cells. Its pulsating core emitted a soft hum, vibrating the air around it with barely contained energy. Caleb ran his fingers along the sleek surface, his mind racing through possibilities. If he could disrupt the quantum flow at just the right point, it might cause a cascading failure across the entire system, enough to disable Terethea's entire fleet. He had to be careful, though. Any mistake, any sign of hesitation, could alert Terethea that he was plotting something. His mind drifted back to the conversation with Lyra the night before. Her confidence in his ability had inspired him. But now, standing before this alien device, he felt the full weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. "What do you think, Caleb?" Terethea's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as she approached him from behind. "Isn't it magnificent? With this technology, I will be unstoppable. And you, my brilliant human, will help make it perfect." Caleb swallowed hard, forcing a calm expression. "It's impressive, Your Majesty. I've never seen anything like it." Terethea smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "I knew you would appreciate it. This is why I chose you, Caleb. You have a mind that can grasp the intricacies of power. But remember," she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, "betray me, and there will be no corner of the universe where you can hide." Caleb nodded, feeling the cold touch of her threat. "I understand." As the Queen left him to his work, Caleb's hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to focus. He had to figure out a way to sabotage this machine without being caught. But how? The system was designed with layers of redundancy and security. Any tampering would likely trigger alarms throughout the ship. That's when it hit him. He didn't need to destroy the system, just overload it. If he could subtly increase the quantum flow, the power grid might destabilize on its own. It would look like a malfunction, a simple engineering failure. He could avoid suspicion while crippling the Queen's plans. Over the next several hours, Caleb worked on the machine, running diagnostics and pretending to fix minor issues. All the while, he carefully adjusted the quantum regulators, increasing the energy flow by small increments, just enough to create instability over time. By the end of the day, Caleb had set the stage for the sabotage. The machine hummed steadily, unaware of the ticking time bomb that now lay within its circuits. Caleb was exhausted, but he couldn't afford to show it. As he stepped back from the machine, Terethea re-entered the room, her gaze sweeping over him with an air of ownership. "Well, my pet," she purred, "have you done what I asked?" Caleb gave a slight bow, keeping his expression neutral. "Yes, Your Majesty. The system is stable for now, but I'll need to monitor it over the next few days to ensure there are no further issues." Terethea smiled, seemingly satisfied. "Good. You've earned yourself a brief reprieve, Caleb. But don't forget, your every move is being watched." Caleb nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as he left the room. He knew the Queen's warning was no idle threat, but for now, he had done what he could. The sabotage was in place, and it was only a matter of time before it took effect. As he made his way back to his quarters, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The rebellion had begun, but he was now walking a razor's edge. One wrong step could bring everything crashing down, not just for him, but for everyone aboard the ship. The rebellion grows. The days that followed were a blur of tension and covert meetings. Lyra had kept her word, gradually connecting Caleb with more members of the underground resistance. They were a ragtag group, aliens from various species, each with their own reason for hating Terethea's rule. Some were former soldiers, captured in battle and forced to serve. Others were scientists, like Caleb, brought aboard for their knowledge and enslaved to the Queen's will. Caleb learned quickly that the resistance was larger than he had anticipated. Small acts of defiance had been happening all along. Sabotage of minor systems, misinformation spread among the guards, and quiet whispers of rebellion in the dark corners of the ship. But until now, they had lacked the resources and coordination to strike at Terithia where it hurt. Now, with Caleb's expertise in propulsion systems, the resistance had a real chance. "You've done well," Lyra told him during one of their secret meetings. "The machine is on the verge of collapse. When it goes down, the chaos will give us the cover we need to make our move." Caleb nodded, though he couldn't shake the knot of anxiety in his chest. The sabotage had been subtle, but Terethia wasn't stupid. She would eventually realize what was happening. And when she did, there would be hell to pay. "What's the next step?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice low as they stood in the shadows of a maintenance corridor. Lyra glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "We wait for the signal. When the machine fails, it'll disable the fleet's communication systems. That's when we strike. We'll take control of the command center and disable the ship's defenses. After that, we make our escape." Caleb's heart raced. This was it, the culmination of everything they had been working toward. But there was still so much that could go wrong. "And if we fail?" Lyra's eyes hardened. "We can't afford to fail, Caleb. Terethia will destroy us all if she finds out what we're planning." Caleb nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He knew that once the sabotage took effect, there would be no turning back. The rebellion was about to begin, and Caleb would either be a hero or a corpse. The collapse. Caleb was jolted awake by the harsh buzz of the door chime. His heart raced as he swung his legs off the bed, knowing the collapse he'd been engineering for days must be imminent. A guard stood at the entrance to his quarters, looking flustered. "You're needed in the propulsion room now," the guard barked, his tone lacking the usual arrogance Caleb had grown accustomed to. Caleb quickly grabbed his gear and followed, keeping his expression neutral. He couldn't afford to show any sign of guilt or suspicion. The sabotage was in motion, and now he had to act the part of the Queen's loyal engineer. As they marched through the corridors of the ship, the hum of energy that had always surrounded him felt different, more chaotic. The ship itself seemed to sense that something was wrong. When they arrived at the propulsion chamber, it was worse than Caleb had expected. The Queen's prized machine, the centerpiece of her fleet's power, was flickering wildly. Sparks flew from exposed conduits, and the hum of the quantum reactor was growing erratic, each pulse vibrating through the floor in uneven bursts. Technicians rushed about in a frenzy, trying desperately to bring the system back under control. Terethia stood at the center of it all, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Her eyes locked onto Caleb as soon as he entered the room, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "What is happening, Caleb?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This system was stable. You assured me it was stable." Caleb swallowed hard, forcing himself to approach the machine. He could feel her gaze burning into his back, and he knew she wouldn't hesitate to end him if she suspected the truth. "The system was stable, Your Majesty," he said, trying to project calm confidence. "But something must have overloaded it. I need to run diagnostics to see where the failure is coming from." He crouched down beside the machine, pretending to study the control panel while his mind raced. The quantum flow regulators were approaching critical levels, just as he had planned. But there was no way to reverse the process now. The sabotage was irreversible, and the Queen's most powerful asset was on the verge of collapse. Terethia hovered over him, her anger palpable. "Fix it, Caleb. Now." Caleb pressed a few buttons on the console, knowing full well that the system was beyond repair. He needed to buy time. Time for the resistance to make their move. The room was alive with tension, and Caleb could sense the fear among the technicians. They knew what this machine represented, and they knew the Queen would not forgive failure. After several agonizing moments, Caleb straightened up and turned to face Terethia. He kept his expression as neutral as possible, even as the Queen's eyes bored into him. "I'm afraid it's more serious than we thought," he said. "The quantum regulators have been damaged. The power grid is overloading, and it's only a matter of time before the entire system fails." Terethia's eyes flashed with anger, but beneath the rage, Caleb saw something else. Fear. The Queen had built her empire on the power of this technology, and now it was slipping from her grasp. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Caleb hesitated, knowing that whatever he said next could seal his fate. Minutes, maybe less. For a moment, Terethia stood in silence, her mind racing. Then, without warning, she spun on her heel and barked orders to the guards and technicians. "Evacuate this room. Secure the ship's critical systems." As the technicians scrambled to obey, Caleb took a step back, hoping to melt into the background. But before he could make his escape, Terethia's gaze snapped back to him. "You will stay, Caleb," she commanded. "You will fix this." His heart sank. She wasn't going to let him leave. Not until the collapse was complete. He had to think fast. The room emptied quickly, leaving Caleb alone with Terethia and a handful of guards. The machine's hum had grown louder, more erratic, and the air was thick with the smell of burning circuits. Caleb could feel the heat radiating from the system, the energy threatening to burst free at any moment. He glanced at the door, his mind racing. He needed to find a way out. Fast. But Terethia was watching him closely, her silver eyes cold and calculating. Then, just as Caleb's mind was spiraling into panic, the lights flickered. The room shuddered violently, and a deafening crack echoed through the chamber as the machine's core surged with energy. It was happening. The sabotage was taking full effect. Terethia's eyes widened in shock, and Caleb seized the moment. "Get down," he shouted, diving for cover just as the quantum reactor exploded in a burst of blinding light. The shockwave ripped through the room, sending debris flying in every direction. Caleb hit the ground hard, his ears ringing from the blast. For a moment, the world was a blur of noise and chaos. When the dust finally settled, Caleb forced himself to his feet, coughing as he stumbled through the wreckage. The machine was in ruins, its core a smoking crater of twisted metal and shattered circuits. Sparks flickered from broken conduits, casting eerie shadows across the room. Terethia was lying on the ground, groaning in pain as she struggled to sit up. Her once perfect composure was gone, replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. Caleb took a step toward her, his mind racing. This was his chance. The Queen was vulnerable. But before he could move, the door to the chamber burst open, and a group of resistance fighters stormed in, weapons drawn. "Caleb." Lyra's voice cut through the chaos as she rushed toward him. "We're getting you out of here." Caleb's heart raced with relief. The resistance had timed their attack perfectly, striking just as the Queen's power was crumbling around her. He glanced at Terethia, who was still struggling to regain her footing. For a moment, their eyes met, and Caleb saw the fury burning within her. "Go," Lyra urged, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the exit. "We don't have much time." Caleb didn't need to be told twice. He followed Lyra and the others out of the chamber, leaving the shattered remains of the Queen's machine and her empire behind. As they ran through the corridors of the ship, alarms blaring around them, Caleb couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The collapse had begun, and the rebellion was in full swing. But he knew that the fight was far from over. Terethia wouldn't go down without a fight, and the real battle was just beginning. The final confrontation. The resistance fighters moved swiftly through the ship's labyrinth of corridors, taking out guards and disabling security systems with precision. Caleb followed closely behind Lyra, his heart pounding in his chest. The Queen's reign of terror was crumbling, but Terethia was still out there, wounded but not defeated. "We're heading to the command center," Lyra explained as they moved. "If we can take control of the ship's systems, we can disable her remaining defenses and free the rest of the prisoners." Caleb nodded, his mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. The sabotage had worked, but now they were in the heart of the Queen's stronghold. One misstep, and everything they had fought for could come crashing down. As they neared the command center, the tension grew thicker. The sound of gunfire echoed down the hall, and Caleb could see flashes of light from energy weapons as the resistance clashed with Terethia's forces. Lyra paused at the entrance to the command center, her eyes scanning the area for signs of danger. "This is it," she whispered. "Are you ready?" Caleb swallowed hard, nodding. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew there was no turning back. Together, they pushed through the doors, entering the heart of Terethia's ship.